We're trying to deal with the whole view of the situation. Next slide, please. So I want to talk about budget and policy priorities. One of our beliefs is we have work to do to help to maintain our rural character here. And actually preserving rural character, there are some laws that ask us to do what we can to preserve what's most valuable, for us, not only for our environment, but also for our community and our economy. One of my checkered careers, I was a policy wonk back in DC with an outfit called the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and this is the kind of work that we did, is that we basically hoovered out extremely boring and detailed budgetary information and tried to bring it alive, put it back out into the media in very simple ways with raw comparative statistics. So I'm hoping that I might be able to shed a little bit of light on that tonight. Next slide. And the way you do this is you ask yourself, what are the indicators? You need to be looking like if you're investing in the stock market or something, you're looking at all those graphs, you're looking for indicators for trends on where it may not happen in the future and where you want to place your bets. And you're asking yourself, what are my priorities? I've only got so much money in my pocket. I've got all these things I want to try to do. How do I make those hard decisions about what's the most important? Environment, community, economy. Next slide. The State of Washington Office of Financial Management maintains a website called the Local Government Budget Reporting System, Financial Reporting System. And every public outfit in the state, from ports to cities to towns, report into this system. This is an extract off this system, and it shows some trend lines from the last 10 years of where the county's spending is on three key categories: health and human services, natural resources, which is natural resource policy and planning primarily, and in general government. And everything is kind of trending along here until about the middle of the decade, and then you can pretty much see for yourself. And I don't think that I need to editorialize on these numbers. These are raw numbers that the county reported. This is presented in a cumulative percentage over time, which is a key indicator in sort of understanding budget trends that policymakers have been putting tax dollars into. Next slide, please. Another kind of indicator we have are the reports that we are doing here about our economy and our community. This report, the San Juan Prosperity Project, was released by the Opportunity Council about 2 weeks ago. You may have seen it on the online newspapers. We got a lot of folks out here with real concerns about affordable Medicare, energy assistance, living wage jobs. These are real problems in the community. Next slide. We hear a lot about managing growth here in San Juan County. These, next slide will be a flick. U.S. Census from 2000 as compared to the recent numbers in 2010, the county population has grown by hardly over 1,000 people in the last 10 years or so. I've mentioned this to a number of folks here over the last week, and when they pick their jaws up off the table, off the floor, they seem a little bit surprised. And they would have thought that the population growth out here had been quite a bit more than that, but it has not. Next slide. So I call this bugs or babies, and forgive me for the editorializing, but this is sort of like the old story about whether it's going to be bread or bombs, in terms of spending. And this is going to be a visual timeline, and you're going to see this pie chart move from the year 2000 to 2010. It's kind of small to read. Natural resources over here, health and human services over here. If we get lucky, if you can just click right in the center of that, go back, take the mouse. There you go, and then just click. There you go. All right, so now you start to see the trends. In about 2004, they're pretty equal. And then about the middle of the past decade, you can see that Health and Human Services is sort of consistently losing ground to natural resource spending here in the county. So this is another way kind of drilling down from that first chart we looked at just a moment ago. Next slide. Now, this is going to be another little short movie. I won't spend too much time with this. This is overall 10-year spending trends across all the primary categories of the county budget. But I'll just draw your attention to the brown bar here, which is natural resources. This green bar, which is human services, general government, is over here. I find most fascinating the general contrast to law and justice over the 10-year cycle. So give it a click, see if we can roll this one. And watch what happens here after about 2005. And what personally struck me in this insight was how close the natural resource spending is to law and justice after a while. Next slide. All right, so let's take a look at the nonprofit sector. These are two key funders. They collect money, they do projects, and the community have for a long time. I ran the local United Way campaign here for a couple of years. I've seen a lot of these issues on the ground. And I just thought that I would compare the annual revenues of the United Way to the annual revenues of the Friends of the San Juan. So again, this is tax data going back from 2003 to 2009 from IRS 990 filings. Go ahead and click on that. And I just feel like there's a gorilla in the room. Next slide. This is called the bouncing ball, like from the old, Ted Mack amateur hour. And what these are various local taxes, like your hotel and motel tax. And the big one here is, of course, the real estate excise tax. We're going to run another timeline here. What I want you to focus on is the brown ball right there. Don't worry about the rest of the stuff. Just watch that thing. Let's go ahead and run it. Happy days are here again. The sky above is blue. Well, maybe not so much. That's the bubble. Okay? Let's watch it again. Wouldn't you like to play with all that money? When you had it, let's move on to the next slide. Now, this is similar to the slide that Ed showed a little while ago. These are conservation lands, and the projector kind of washes out the colors a little bit. If you go ahead and you click on the little movie here, just give it a click, and it'll take a moment to kind of get going. You'll start to see the cursor is going to move across the islands, and then it's going to select that first bar there, which is land bank acquisitions, and that's about 200 parcels, and you can kind of see them flish on and off. And then the cursor is going to move over then to the next bar, and that's the San Juan Preservation Trust. These parcels do not perform at the levels that they used to in terms of contributing to the tax base in the county, although we've made a policy choice that this is a good thing. And I personally think it's been a good thing for a long time, and I won't editorialize on whether any changes are necessary. But the world is not the same as it was 10 years ago. There have been changes and shifts in budget and policy priorities in this county, and I think that we need to sort of understand and reflect upon how we're being affected by those changes in budgets and policy priorities in terms of how we're contending with our community and economy in the context of the environment. Next slide. So once again, maintaining rural character here in the islands is going to boil down to, among other things, a question of priorities. where do we want to put our resources and invest our time and energy in order to achieve the best balance here. Last slide, I think, is just thank you very much. Thanks. I want to be careful about that because I don't have the numbers on the top of my head, but they're in spreadsheets on my laptop. They are in the millions.
What's it spent on?
Well, there's a couple of key categories. One of the largest expenditures has been through the Salmon Recovery Board. There's been several large grants. One has been in excess of $1 million, and another one almost $750,000, 2 years later, for salmon protection projects. There have been an increasing number of grants from the Department of Ecology for regulatory policy planning, frankly, since 2005. There's also been a couple of fairly large grants through the Department of Natural Resources, and I don't know. It's really a second level of analysis to look at the basic state budget, spending patterns, and then dig down to the next level and say, okay, show me the grants, the objectives of those grants, who the contracting officers were, what the project outcomes were supposed to be, and were they, accomplished.
So those expenditures were really not a burden on the local taxpayers, they were grants?
What? Oh. Well, that would be also like saying that a lot of the money that comes through the military department of the state to the sheriff's department and to fire stations and such is not either a burden on the taxpayers or a particular benefit, to them. An awful lot of the county budget is relying upon external granting sources, whether at the state level, or the federal level. And I don't know what the percentage of that overall grant funding picture is, but it's very, very large.
Is the point that as a county we've been going to get grants for natural resource things, or have they been coming to us? And vice versa, have we been ignoring opportunities in health and human services and economic development, or is there money out there that we haven't been looking for because we've been searching for natural resource funding? Is one taking away from the other, or is just one coming to us?
Well, I think you put your finger on the key question. And I'm not going to stand here and say that I have an exact answer, for you. I'm interested in indicators, okay? And so the data that I have presented, in my opinion, is indicative that the county budget process is off balance and is not sufficiently addressing health and human service issues or economic development issues, but is sort of embroiled in a what was the old word that Alan Greenspan used to use? Something about great enthusiasm. Okay, somebody help me here. This was a long time ago. When you have a bubble. Yeah, exactly. When you have a funding bubble like this, there's a lot of easy money that shows up about anything. One of the tendencies of human behavior is to become extremely inventive, perhaps somewhat less rigorously than one would when resources are scarce. If you go back and you look at the .com, .bomb movement a lot of us, worked through back in the late 90s, there was way too much easy money, chasing a lot of very silly, flimsy business plans, and they all took a bath, okay? What I'm suggesting here is that we have seen a bubble in environmental policy planning, which has resulted in a lot of inventive ideas, regulatory enthusiasm, okay? Most of which I believe that my dear sainted father, an English teacher, would simply grade as F without going past the first page because the products are so poorly written. And like the investment in the business plans from the dot-com days, they're going to go the same way.
Time for one more question?
Yeah.
Jen?
You've all presented really interesting information. It meshes and interrelates, and I think it's been very valuable, and I thank you for it, and for all the work that you and others have done in trying to bring information to the public. But this does seem like a process that just never ends. It goes on and on and on and on. And I know that eventually we are going to come to the end of it. The CAO is going to be figured out, and we're going to have this done. But it seems like there has to be a point where we need some assistance on initiatives, on advocacy, on what will be suggested. Does CFA plan to suggest courses of action for people who are concerned about the regulatory apparatus in the county?
Okay, thank you. One last comment. I agree with the point. A lot of this is outside money coming in, so it's not a direct taxpayer burden. But this kind of outside money does not come in without influence. And it comes with it a package of extraordinary influence on the priorities that we make, that we pursue. Thanks.
Just go ahead.
Paul.
I was going to ask, how much of what you just demonstrated here could be explained by the fact that the county has apparently been trying to come into compliance with state law for about the period that you covered there.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, has been through this process about 3 times, and that as a result of that, they've had to seek funding elsewhere because they couldn't afford to keep doing it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So
Well, personally, I don't know that I could explain it that way, but that's a reasonable path of inquiry to look into. The fact remains that at about the halfway point during the last 10 years, the amount of funding from the Environmental Protection Agency, the Department of Ecology, the Salmon Recovery Board, whatever, began to flow into this county very rapidly and a high volume of it. Jobs were created, committees were appointed, there were decisions of influence made about the appointments to those committees and the individuals hired, and I would wager to say that you probably have less than 20 or 30 individuals who are directly involved in implementing the programs of these funds for 16,000 residents who have a hard time understanding just exactly what's going on.
And the fact that it comes from the state, that pressure comes from the state, is a big problem, which gets back to what Tim was saying in the very beginning. If we need to decide what we want to do, and then we need to basically, just because the state has a lot of hot air doesn't mean that we have to fill up with it, okay? We can say, no, we don't think that this makes sense, this is not logical, and everything that you're pushing on us, it doesn't apply to us.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we're talking about, is just getting clear about what we want to present to the state, not just acquiescing because they have a bunch of money.
Mm-hmm. It's a little bit like the Beltway effect, but it's here, and I don't want to blame the county. It's really hard to work for the county. They're very dedicated people. But when this much money shows up so quickly, then you start following the money, and you're going to have to sort of take human nature into consideration when you figure out what's going on.
Good. Thank you, Richard.